It's difficult to overstate the wide-reaching effects and threats that a world war will present to civilians. History furnishes us with many examples, sadly, of just how badly and for how long civilians in war zones can expect to suffer. Aside from the obvious physical danger of open conflict with modern weaponry, you can expect disease, shortages, and exposure to be ever-present threats to your safety and the safety of your family and loved ones. But those historical examples can also provide us with lessons, hard-learned and often paid for in blood, on how one can survive or at least increase your chances of surviving the next big world war. Now, you might be thinking that you have an advantage against being directly affected or harmed by a war because you're a civilian and you're not in military service. Now, that sounds fairly logical on the surface, except it's just not true. Now, what I'm referring to is civilians that are actually in and near conflict zones, not half the globe away while your country's military conducts small localized police actions within tightly defined boundaries in various theaters of open operation. No. If you're near the actual front lines of a battle, in and around congested cities, or just in the path of troop movements, you had better believe you are in danger, directly and personally. Military strikes on targets of importance, deployment of tactical and strategic weapons, mistaken identity shootings, being shot for being suspected or being partisan or a spy, and the predation by criminal enterprise and the truly desperate that invariably occur in such troubled times are all constant and certain threats. Even if you aren't, and you're just in the country that has seen war within its borders, you're still probably going to suffer from second and third order effects that war brings on. All civil services will be disrupted or greatly reduced in both availability and efficiency. You will likely see shortages that are previously unimaginable. All utilities are likely going to become unreliable at best and completely compromised at worst. Exposure, dehydration, starvation, and death from otherwise easily preventable injuries and wounds will become very common. If no one knows where to look and cares to examine the data, you will see all major open warfare in the 20th century resulted in a staggering death toll for civilians in or around or near the war zones. Now, while you might think, hey, the majority of those casualties would be limited to soldiers and sailors that are actually doing the heavy lifting of the fighting, the sad fact is that the hapless civilians are most often the grist for the mill. All too common for governments, even well-intentioned ones, to focus on keeping their fighting forces fit, healthy, and well-supplied, so they may keep on fighting and hopefully bring the conflict to a close in a short order. That means what supplies are available and known to governments will be embarked and prioritized for those that are currently actively helping the war effort, not civilians who are little more than targets of opportunity for the enemy. Now, it's difficult to say what might cause the next world war. Certainly, major acts of aggression are always one possibility. Though in this emergent era of fourth-generation warfare, conduction of hostilities by proxies and overall trends of reducing standard military power, as well as stocks of strategic weapons like this, seems less likely all the time. Nonetheless, it's difficult to imagine how certain black swan events would not result in a worldwide conflict. The deployment of any nuclear weapon for any reason is very, very likely to result in a disaster domino, a chain of response and riposte that invariably sucks all concerned nations that are able to participate into a massive conflict. You could also say the same for mass deployment of chemical or biological weapons against the civilian population, at least against the Western or First World civilian population. Now, another cause may be something seemingly innocuous. A small conflict or localized skirmish may snowball with smaller belligerents seeming their neighbors and allies getting involved, each drawing a long interlinked succession of agreements and guarantees for aid until major superpowers are forced to intervene personally. Then all it takes is the accidental destruction or attack against a target considered off limits for the hostilities to grow geometrically. Now, ultimately, there are dozens and dozens of scenarios that could plausibly lead to World War III. And it's not important that you codify all of them, only that you understand that the possibility exists, and it is very real, even in the increasingly peaceful times that we live in. Now, it's difficult to predict exactly the kind of situation you will find yourself in when directly threatened by war. What's being said, historical analysis shows that the threats are typical, and if you are wise, you will do your best to be prepared for all of them. Now, if you're lucky, you might only have to deal with a few of these. But if you're not, you might be plugging one hole in the boat, so to speak, only for one or two more to pop up at the same time. And as I said at the beginning, this will be the most dire test of your survival abilities. Because the outcome will never be certain. All you can do is what you can do with what you have. You'll have to take your chances just like everyone else. Nonetheless, with the right knowledge, determination, and steadfast courage to endure the unbearable, you can survive a world war, and in the wake of the ruin it leaves behind it. During times of war, there will be all sorts of people running around that can hurt you or just take what you have. Obviously, soldiers, especially soldiers of the enemy nation, are likely to shake down civilians for supplies, valuables, and luxury items, and do all sorts of nasty things to them. Many atrocities throughout history have been perpetrated by soldiers against civilians on a personal, face-to-face level. It's awful to think that, and do not forget that perpetrators may be the soldiers of your own nation. Unless you are well away from the front lines and being processed through military checkpoints for travel, aid, or other such administrative functions, you must make it a point to stay well away from soldiers at all costs. Now, if the war is starting to slow down, or you're in an area that doesn't see much action, it might be possible to trade with soldiers who are policing or staging in that area. Though this comes with its own risk, as many soldiers are on edge in any war zone, and there will always be the risk that you can be mistaken for an enemy spy, saboteur, or person of interest, or just a hapless victim of an accidental weapon discharge. With the number, type, and quality of weapons that will be all over an active conflict zone, this is a constant threat. Soldiers are the only people that you have to worry about in a war zone. It never fails that criminal activity spikes, sometimes surprisingly, during and after the passage of a war. Gangs will form, and the gangs that already exist will likely see a swelling of membership and movement to overt activity as they set about pursuing whatever whims they will. This could come in the form of direct robbery, burglary, racketeering, setting up brothels, and engaging in outright mayhem. Now, lastly, you won't be able to truly trust anyone who is not already inside of your circle of trust. You can rest assured that the war will hit all civilians equally hard for the most part, and those who are desperate to provide for their families may do desperate, even evil things in order to do so. You can never let your guard down around anyone you don't already know and know very well. If you like this video, you might want to hit that like button. Check this video out and do not forget to subscribe. I'm AP, and until next time, I'm out of here.